second time this week because we had a meeting on first thing on Monday morning to talk about the budget and how it about the education budget as being part of the main budget. So we met that, and that obviously we sent then off to the it was the the budget scrutiny, went through the budget scrutiny process. So we sent that on, and we all would have had a copy of that letter. Could I ask if there are any apologies?
Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor James McGettrick and Susan Jones.
Great, thank you very much. Are then the other any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest from anyone? If there are, if you could let us know, and we'll get the relevant form off to you. Right. Obviously, the prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. And the next item is the minutes. And has anybody got any comments on the minutes? I can't see any hands up. So great. Can I take those as a true record? Proposer, great. Thanks. This is Sandra and Bev. Great. Thank you. The letter that I sent off to Councillor Robert Smith on our behalf. That's really to note. And the next item on the agenda is public questions, and there are none. So we're racing through the agenda at some pace. And then we're on to number 7, which is managing improving school attendance and inclusions. Excuse me. And could I welcome Councillor Robert Smith, a Cabinet Member, and Helen Morgan-Rees, our Director, and Kate Phillips, Head of Vulnerable Learners Service. And who is going to kick off first? Robert,
if I just say a few words and thank both Helen Howells and Helen Morgan-Rees for drafting this report and the presentation this afternoon. Title is Attendance and Exclusions. Members will be aware of long-standing concerns going back at least to the pandemic about the impact and the trends that we've seen in terms of both attendance and behaviour. Let's look at it in the round, attendance and behaviour since the pandemic. What I think this report does is to present the seriousness of the situation. It is a serious situation, but I think we also need to look at the positives, look at what Swansea schools, supported by the council, are achieving in relation both to attendance and in reaching the goal of trying to reduce the escalating rate of exclusions as well. Both of them are equally important and require distinct approaches. And I think if we hand over to Helen to take us through, both Helens to take us through the report, and then perhaps we can have a discussion after, Chair.
Great, thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. So our team manager for learner engagement, Helen Howells, has joined us instead of Kate Phillips, our head of service for vulnerable learners, this afternoon. And I'm grateful for that, Helen. So in terms of the report itself, I'm not going to comment on the report beforehand, but happy to answer any questions. It's a very comprehensive report with many appendices. So I think Helen's going to take us through the key highlights of the report.
Helen, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And if it's okay with you, I was hoping to take a short pause after the attendance information to answer any questions, because otherwise it might get a bit convoluted, and it is quite a long report. So in terms of the background then, the Education Directorate's vision to promote an attendance and supporting behaviour in schools is set out in its inclusion strategy, which was approved by Cabinet in May 2023. So a number of priorities were identified within that strategy to foster positive habits within schools, including promoting attendance, inclusion, and embedding that shared inclusion ethos. So these priorities have a set of actions to support increasing attendance and reducing exclusions. The reason, obviously, that we've put attendance and exclusions together is in terms of school attendance and pupil behaviour. They are affected by many factors, and many similar factors, in fact, and they are including but not limited to poverty and high cost of living, the effect of the pandemic and lockdown, rising mental health issues among children and young people, and access to suitable curriculum, adverse childhood experiences, increase in children presenting with additional learning needs, home environment and differences in parental support, social media, and a challenging budget position. So it's recognised that any solution to improving attendance or supporting pupil behaviour and reducing exclusion, should be part of any multi-agency joined up and collaborative approach. They're cross-cutting themes, and it needs that attendance strategy to look at the whole thing holistically. So our attendance strategy, which was approved by Cabinet in 2023, focuses on that recognition that attendance is everybody's responsibility. And if I can draw your attention to point 2.1, please. I just want to take you through some of the academic last year's highlights in terms of attendance. So we know that it remains a national priority, and I've put some graphs in here just to show that national context. But I want to be really clear that while the national context is really important, we remain committed to increasing attendance in Swansea schools, regardless of what national priorities and positions look like. And we recognise that every day of education loss can have that profound and detrimental impact on the individual life chances. So in terms of the academic year 23-24, there were slight increases, I'm pleased to report, at both primary and secondary school level in Swansea. And I think it needs to be noted that while there are these slight positive changes, that is because of holistic approaches, and that needs time to be embedded. And any small incremental increase in attendance is the result of significant work over a period of time, sometimes years, from both schools and the Education Welfare Service. So you can see in the table there that specific attendance data from last year compared with the year before. So the EWS have put together an action plan, which you can find in Appendix B, and it's written to support school attendance in every setting. And that's in line with the inclusion strategy, which is the Appendix A. There's a clear aim to deliver against that action plan through intervention based on research. And that's really important to us, that we are looking at national and local research. So the EWS team have looked at research delivered by Sir Alistair MacDonald, who disseminated in a conference called Reimagining Attendance in a Post-Pandemic World. The ethos around belonging is a key driver in attendance in all contexts. And that can be seen in the second point in 2.3 there, where we're looking at an awareness of actions and consequences which are not strongly linked. So sanctions reinforce that idea that a school is not welcoming for a child, and we want to avoid that at every cost. So we are moving away from any punitive response to attendance in terms of fixed penalty notices, and trying our best to engage with the families and work with the family as best we can. And we want this to be on a family by family and a really good learner-based approach. So the Welsh Government also acknowledge that that has to be the case, and their holistic approach is, their response to this is through family engagement officers, which are sometimes referred to as family liaison officers. And they're looking at family engagement officers to really allow schools to engage with and support the families. And that obviously will lead to that reduction in fixed penalty notices, or the need for fixed penalty notices. In fact, the Education Directorate has developed an FEO, or Family Engagement Officer network, for which the Education Welfare Service are integral members, because the focus has to be on the outcomes of raising attendance. So those attendance outcomes are considered at every meeting, and actually Welsh Government have adopted that Swansea model of network meetings at a national level, considering it good practice. So in terms of children who are vulnerable, the Welsh Government have a national priority for children who are entitled to free school meals. Welsh Government report that 45% of pupils who are entitled to free school meals were persistently absent during the last academic year. And this is what our local data is telling us also. Our local data is collated through our action plans, and that can be found in Appendix C, and our register checks, which can be found in Appendix D. These are child-focused data, which is really important to us, and school action plans are key to support change and sharing good practice. Really pleasing to note there are some schools who are reversing this trend, including Seaview, Plasmal Primary School and Kevin Hengoed Comprehensive School, where attendance of children entitled to free school meals is actually improving. So more recently, the team have undertaken some further research in terms of pupil voice, and we attended the big conversation on the 28th of January. So a report is in draft form, but we are really pleased with what we've heard from pupil voice outcomes. The early indications are showing that learners feel that school is really important. They feel that parents have got their place to support them to go to school, and however, their well-being and mental health should be considered as a priority rather than attendance and exam results. Most pupils would like school to be more fun, preferring outdoor learning and an emphasis on their well-being. In the Education Directorate, we are piloting this type of work with a few bespoke therapeutic packages through our home tuition team. And when our final report outlining pupil voice is compiled, we'll try and close that loop and share it with the emotional health and psychological wellbeing group to look at how we can support wellbeing more holistically. So attendance figures for this academic year, the autumn term in this academic year, shows a few noticeable improvements compared with the same reporting data last year, specifically in secondary schools and special schools, which show a really good increase of 1.2% and 0.6% respectively. And I've noted in 2.6 of the report some really good exceptional increases in some of the schools there. So any future development has to be with the continuation of our project with Swansea University, which we're looking at coding. So that coding is going to be broken down into several different parts to allow that really good analysis of what's happening for a school and for an individual. And we really want to work far better and far closer with our partnership and involvement team to support opportunities to understand parent, carer and learner voice, specifically around attendance, so these continue to inform our policies and strategies. So I'm going to stop there to see if anybody would like to have any questions regarding attendance.
Great, thanks, Helen. Thanks for that very thorough report. Actually, a lot of work has gone in, and to get us to this point. Are there any questions online? And I can see Councillor Mike Day's got his hand up. So, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting, isn't it? And as you said, the importance of attendance in school can't be underestimated. And I think one of the things that I've noted, which Helen, thank you for highlighting, is the exceptional increases noted in Bishop Gore, Bishopston, etc. in paragraph 2.6. I think we were all impressed with the visit that we made to Bishop Gore and the actions that are being taken there. I just wondered if there were specific actions by individual schools which seem to be having a greater benefit in terms of improved attendance, and how those lessons are being shared with other schools. And I'm sure that there would be opportunities amongst the different groups that meet for that to happen. But if we can be sharing the good practice and whether that can be embedded in other schools, I think that would be something which would be very important for us to see.
Thanks, Helen. Over to you.
Certainly, thank you, Councillor Day. Yeah, really interesting and fascinating data that we've really looked through. In terms of specific issues, strategies are very bespoke to schools, and actually what would work in one school might not necessarily work in another, but we are trying really hard to share all good practice that's happening in schools through our action plans, through the school action plan, and through EWO having those constant meetings. So they meet every week just to discuss what's happening and to understand what's happening within certain schools. In terms of specific interventions, there's a lot of work in some schools around emotional based school avoidance and those EBSA techniques. So that allows a really good analysis of what's happening to the learner, to their family, and including the learner and their family in those action plans to try and get the child back into school. The ethos is around belonging. So in those schools, there is a reluctance to issue a fixed penalty notice, rather have really good family engagement. And I think the research, both locally and nationally, is around family engagement and working with the families to encourage that community-based approach to try and get the children back into school to find out exactly what's wrong.
Great, thank you. Mike, do you want to come back?
No, I think that's really helpful. I suppose I was also thinking about, whilst I recognise that individual actions in schools will depend upon the circumstances, whether there are things that are done in some schools, for example, on the day of absence, in relation to is there a constant or a comprehensive pattern of schools, trying to contact the home if they haven't heard that the child is going to be absent due to illness or whatever, whether those sorts of things are in place.
Yes, absolutely. In most schools, there are they do have a particular person to do the first day absence, to do the ringing round, and to making sure that parents are identified and communicated with when that child hasn't arrived at school. So that those processes are in place. And yes, you're absolutely right, a good practice. Further examples would be around how rewards are issued for attendance. So we've seen some really good practice in terms of that distance travelled, rather than that focus on 100%. The focus should be on the increase in attendance to encourage that belonging within the school. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Fine, thanks. If I could say as well, you mentioned it should be noted that there are schools who are reversing the trend, and that was Seaview Primary School, Plasmol Primary School, and Kevin Hengoyd Comprehensive School around free school meals, and that would be interesting to share with other schools to see what they do, because that would be a specific set of problems. Obviously, if they've found a solution, rather than reinvent the wheel, but as you rightly say, it's got to be bespoke for every school, because everybody will have different issues. Helen, you want to come in?
Yeah, the work of Kevin Hengoyd has been recognised by Estin. So there are case studies or spotlights available to support the dissemination of good practice as well. So we can learn not just from Swansea schools, but from across Wales as well, which we're doing.
Great, fine, thank you. And if there aren't any other questions, Helen, you can go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of exclusions, then we're on to point 3.1. We know that it's been reported nationally that behaviour in school is becoming more challenging, and that is rightly reflected in Swansea schools. So during the last academic year, we know that school leaders and trade unions have identified the changing behaviour landscape within school as a major priority, requiring a new approach and swift action. So again, in this part of the report, I have put in some national data, so you can see, you can put that into context of where Swansea is within Wales. However, again, with the caveat that every exclusion is potentially a reduced life change or a reduced life experience for the learner, and we must prioritise reducing exclusions. So in terms of the last academic year. If I move on to point 3.2, a wider information can be found in the appendices, but in terms of the fixed term exclusions, in the last academic year, we know that there was a slight reduction from the year previous. Fixed term exclusions did peak in 2022 to 2023, and so we did see that drop last year. However, these figures remain higher than the post-COVID data that we have recorded, so we can't minimise that and we can't rest on our laurels. We always have to ensure that we're still working towards that behaviour issues within school. Quite pleasing though that we've recorded a reduction in fixed term exclusion to our looked after learners and those who are eligible for free school meals. So a lot is being done with the vulnerable learners. In terms of permanent exclusions, so we've got overall the number of permanent exclusions have increased in Swansea over the last academic year. And unfortunately, there was one primary school learner who was permanently excluded in the last academic year, which hasn't happened for a number of years, and we hope that that was a blip. We haven't seen any indications this year at all, so we hope that that was a one-off. It was a difficult situation for everyone, and no head teacher takes that decision lightly. In terms of permanent exclusions, we know the majority of excluded learners were male, with almost 4 times as many boys being permanently excluded in comparison to girls. Historically, the assault and violence against learner category has been the main reason cited for permanent exclusions, and this has been continued to be the case over the last academic year. And again, through the last academic year, as a continuation from the previous years, the highest number of fixed term exclusions and permanent exclusions happens in year 9 and year 10. So just moving on then, we have a team of inclusion officers, and they work hard with the schools to trying to avoid exclusions wherever possible. We know that 3 of the children last year had their permanent exclusions rescinded or reversed, and they were supported by their school and received offers of different opportunities to learn and learn from their mistakes, supported by restorative approaches. I think it's really important to note that any learner who does receive a permanent exclusion is supported into education as soon as possible, so that that period of time where there's a gap between education is reduced as much as possible. We do not want that education disrupted, and we know that home tuition is offered when a pupil is between schools to further support the education. So the outcomes and final destinations of those 32 excluded learners were that 62% were supported by the LA to move on to other mainstream schools. Let's have a look. 31% were able to take their place at the Maesero Pro. 3% received a YOTUS recommendation of home tuition, and unfortunately one learner decided to become electively home educated, but luckily we've got a really good supportive elective home education team who was able to support that learner and their family. So wherever possible, the inclusion officers would have explored creative and alternative solutions to support schools to avoid exclusions. And we know that that's because of the negative impact that can happen upon vulnerable learners. However, because of this work, there is a rich avoidance data which isn't necessarily captured on the inclusion database and likely to go unrecorded. So it's just for us to be aware that there's a lot of work going behind the scenes to make sure that those permanent exclusions are reduced as much as possible. So in terms of point 3.4, I just want to draw your attention to managed moves. They are a recognised strategy to offer opportunity for a fresh start to learners experiencing difficulty, often at risk of permanent exclusion. And managed move trials in new schools were offered to both primary and secondary schools during the 23-24 school year. I've put a table in below for you to peruse, to have a little look to see how many managed moves were offered. But I think it's really important to note that these are very good prevention tools, and only 5 learners who took up a managed move actually went on to a YOTUS placement. So we really see it as a preventative and early intervention tool in our toolbox. So despite a small decrease in the number of fixed term exclusions in the last academic year, there is a consistently high number of exclusions, and that indicates that we do need some innovative approaches around behaviour within school. So within the priority of inclusion, there is a current workstream focus on developing a revised behaviour strategy for Swansea schools, and this work is being considered as part of the Education and Skills Service Transformation Committee. Regular updates have been provided to the committee, with committee members providing really good input, engagement and guidance to the policy development process. So to date, there have been, well, actually at the time of writing this report, there were 4 multi-agency stakeholder workshops examining pupil behaviour, and actually a 5th was held just this Tuesday. So in addition to those stakeholder workshops, we've had standalone sessions which have taken place with head teachers, chairs of governing bodies and children and young people themselves. The draft policy acknowledges that all behaviour has a communicative function, and it's important to look at the factors underpinning the behaviour. Children and young people who present with those challenging behaviours should be viewed as vulnerable rather than challenging, and schools should respond to the feelings and emotions that drive behaviour rather than that behaviour itself. So I've summarised the core principles within the draft policy below to promote respect and responsibility, to encourage parental and community engagement, and to create a supportive and consistent environment by encouraging an open and honest and respectful communication amongst all. So if it does say here, obviously, the STC sat last night and did actually approve the local authority behaviour policy, which is great. So the next steps now are going to be to develop a school exemplar policy, which can be adopted and personalised by schools to suit their individual context. And the policy will mirror the local authority strategy, but include additional details such as links to key documents and a practical support in terms of a toolkit to help implementation of the school policy. Strategic implementation plan will also now be developed to ensure that key strategic actions are captured and delivered effectively. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. Yeah, really, obviously a lot of work had gone into that, and you could see. Have we got any questions? I can't see any hands up. Everybody's content. The only thing I would say is that when we talk about exclusions, as you rightly said, it can be life-changing for that individual. And very often, if they're not in school, they could, mix with the wrong people, and their life could become a downward spiral. And therefore, I'm pleased to see that you're doing everything possible, really working really hard to ensure that we can reverse that. And I think that is to great credit that is actually being done. Well, if we haven't got any questions, I can't see any hands up, and nobody else wants to comment in the room. Could I say thank you very much for that report, and very comprehensive report as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
And we move on to how we're going to take a look at how our schools improve the quality of teaching and learning cluster and regional work. And I think Councillor Robert Smith wants to come in, and then David, and welcome to David Thomas. Second night in a row, saw you last night in another place, another meeting, in education meeting. So Robert, would you like to kick off?
Thank you, Chair. And again, I'd like to thank David for the work that's gone into this report, because I think it's a very good summary of the key elements in a self-improving system. It refers to the importance of robust and honest self-evaluation, and then the contribution of collaborative work, schools working with other schools, school-to-school collaboration, developing those networks, and enabling schools to benefit from the expertise that exists in other schools. There's a lot of excellent excellent practice and a lot of expertise in our schools, and it's a matter of how we capture that and harness it for the benefit of the system as a whole. I think that this has been recognised for a long time as one of the hallmarks of an effective education system. And I think it's good to see that Swansea is very well ahead on the road to developing that kind of culture in our schools. And it's not something that's recent. I think this is something that is becoming embedded. We saw examples of that in the work in some of the schools we visited. And I think it's something that we need to encourage and build upon, and that we have a solid foundation in Swansea on which to build. So over, I think, first to Helen and then to Di to take us through the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Helen.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, teaching and learning is our bread and butter in education, and it's really good to hear the synergy between the Service Transformation Committee and this panel, because there is no duplication. There is a nice echo happening in terms of what that policy development committee has been looking at during this municipal year. So obviously, teaching and learning is absolutely our bread and butter, and ensuring the quality of teaching and learning across our schools is a thing we have to focus on the most. And underneath that is the progression of learners and how they fare with good quality teaching and learning. It is the cornerstone of everything in terms of education. So I'm pleased that Scrutiny have picked this up as an item to scrutinise this evening. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. If I could mention the thing that Councillor Robert Smith mentioned, in the fact that when this panel go and visit schools, you're actually seeing things at the chalk face, and you can see firsthand what is actually going on. And I think that is so important, because you get a true reflection then of the work that's being done. Great, David, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just confirm that you can hear me and see me okay?
All okay?
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, I would just want to echo Councillor Robert Smith's comments there. Swansea's approach, collaborative approach, is the desire of many local authorities, and we know that because we've engaged with officers that have been allocated the task from Welsh Government in terms of the middle tier review. They've told us that the approach that we've taken in Swansea over many years is a desire of many local authorities. So we come from a good place, and I'm really pleased. And again, echoing thoughts, and I'm pleased that Scrutiny continue to meet with schools. And one of the questions, Chair, that you continue to ask is the impact of the local authorities' approach to collaboration, and of course the regional partnership. So again, really pleased that those continue to be a focus of Scrutiny. Just to set the scene, really, question in the report, we were asked to consider how schools improve teaching and learning through clusters and regional work. And outlined in the report, hopefully you'll be able to see a definition of what teaching is, first of all. And from our perspective, certainly teaching needs to be pupil-centred, inclusive. It needs to be progressive in its nature, obviously, and it needs to be underpinned by specific and high-quality approach to pedagogy. So what are we doing with children and young people that meets their needs? So we need to make sure that we've got high expectations, that we're very nurturing, linking closely to Helen's work, and it needs to be holistic so that it develops children and young people in the whole, not in a very narrow way. And what do we know about learning? Well, we often get asked the question, what is learning? Well, learning, from our perspective, is the development of skills, knowledge, and understanding through well-planned, local and relevant experiences. So the background, hopefully, Chair, sets that out quite clearly. And again, just to reiterate what we mean by some of the terms in the report. So traditionally speaking, a cluster of schools we would know as a comprehensive school surrounded by their geographical and feeder primary schools. So those official feeder primary schools. And that would particularly be, it's usually dominated by organisational transition. So how do the children and young people, the pupils, get from their primary school to the secondary school? Where do they put their coats? And where do they put their bags? And what do their lessons look like? That is what dominated the landscape. Thankfully now, and supported by Curriculum for Wales's guidance, in Swansea, we've been really keen to get teaching and learning on the agenda for that transition. And what I can tell you is, supported by Welsh Government statutory guidance in terms of transition plans, that should now focus on curriculum cohesion. What does the offer look like in a primary school that supports pupils from the age of 3 to 16? And that's firmly on the agenda for schools in Swansea. And I think, Chair, you'll agree that that presentation we saw from Scrutiny's recent visits to Bishop Gore made that front and centre. And again, just to clarify the role of Partneriaeth, our regional partner is constituted of 3 local authorities, Swansea, Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire, and their main role is to provide professional learning to the workforce, to the school-based workforce. And however, they also provide support, and that support might not necessarily be just professional learning, but it comes via a calendared approach to PL, professional learning, and a tailored approach to the individual needs of either individual practitioners and or schools and settings. So that sets the scene for this piece of work. Just running through the report, and again, I'm not going to take away from the detail in the report, so just to highlight some of the key points from my perspective, and I'll pause at a point so that you have a chance to reflect. Underpinning this work is Welsh Government's national priorities set clearly. And those national priorities make it quite clear. The third word is progression. So teaching and learning is front and centre in Welsh Government's guidance. And the improvement in pupil outcomes is the driver for self-evaluation and school improvement planning. So quite simply put, it has to be there and we make sure it is. In terms of school improvement planning, so where I'm trying to link how we improve our schools and the output, school improvement plans and the targets and priorities that set themselves must be pupil focused. Their intended outcomes must focus on what they want pupils to be able to do more, better or differently as a result. And one way to achieve that is to work with your cluster, your colleagues, to support the development of pieces of work. An additional tool which we've got, as aforementioned, is the approach that we've got to professional learning, which we can broker through the regional partnership, but also through collaborative partnerships and networks that are established by that region and the local authority. So what happens with clusters? What can they do? So in the best examples where clusters of schools, and I don't necessarily just mean they're a cluster of feeder primaries, I'm talking about a group of schools together, because it doesn't have to be the cluster of schools in terms of their feeder. What happens in the best examples is they view and share effective practice in order to grow. And that's outlined in point 2.5. We try and grow together. And that viewing of and the sharing of effective practice is more beneficial when it's done from practitioner to practitioner across schools and settings. They get to see different things, they get to see different approaches, and they have an objective view on the outcomes that has, improvements for teaching and learning and outcomes of pupils. Clusters and their partnerships are currently planning and delivering professional learning together. So in the same way that the regional partner does plan and deliver regional professional learning, school-based clusters are now doing that themselves. And that's powerful because the priorities in which they set out to meet by planning that professional learning are much more similar in that local context. And in terms of cohesion, I've mentioned that earlier on, it's the right format by which we provide curriculum cohesion. And what I mean by that is, if you're in a local community, you can plan for the experiences that you wish for your pupils to have much more clearly when you're in a local environment. So the priorities and the experiences you want your pupils to have in neighbouring schools can be much more clearly aligned. However, it's not just about the experiences, it's also about the skills, the broad skills that you want pupils to be able to develop. One example of that could be, and I've mentioned this before, as a cluster of schools, you might choose that when your children come to a secondary school, that it's really important that they develop a sense of sustainability. And that sustainability, the overarching desires for teachers to develop those skills might be, for example, litter in the environment, but that might be different for a pupil who attends a school in the north of the city and the pupil who attends the school in the west of the city. However, the skill development is the same. The experience might be slightly different. So moving on to the report, in terms of this observation of teaching and learning, this idea of reciprocal observations is really useful. We've seen examples in 2 of our Welsh schools recently where teachers undertake reciprocal observations of younger pupils. And what that manages to do is to both identify what becomes known as effective strategies for teaching and learning, but also you see different pedagogical approaches. And you can take that back to your own school and setting and share that with your colleagues. I've mentioned the collaborative approach to professional learning, and something that we see more of is that clusters of schools or groups of schools are getting together, identifying their common priorities and planning together professional learning in order to meet those priorities. There's a number of examples of that happening in Swansea at the moment. One that springs to mind is the Dylan Thomas cluster, and what that looks like when we have an inset. They all close on the same day, for example, and there's a menu of professional learning that's facilitated by practitioners across that cluster. And teachers and teaching assistants sign up to the most appropriate professional learning offer that's available to them, facilitated by those colleagues in those schools. And therefore, it's the sharing of that practice. It's the sharing of the workload, so it's not duplicated across the system. One of those examples we found in the Pentre Harwood cluster, where they've realised there needs to be some continuity and cohesion, curriculum cohesion, because of the deficiency in pupils' ability to write sentences. And therefore, the cluster literacy leads got together and designed a piece of professional learning in order to improve the teaching and learning of that skill. Like I said, I'm not going to read all examples set out in the report. That sets the cluster work in context. And before I move on to the partner area, the regional approach, I'll pause, Chair, if I may, for any questions.
Great, fine. Thank you very much, David. Very thorough report in a very important area. Have we got any questions? Any hands up? Yes, Councillor Mike.
Yeah, thank you, David. That's very helpful and a great overview. And I suppose it's an easy question, but the answer is going to be much more difficult, and that is what does success look like? How do we measure success? Because I guess it's going to be kind of multifaceted in relation to different levels that we're looking at. But whilst we look at individual school development plans, for example, they would have their own measures of success. Are there any other measures that we use? It's just simply, ESTIN reports, you and your colleagues assessing what's going on within schools. How do we actually measure success?
In some part, Mike, you've answered your own question because you've listed a number of those evaluative tools. Certainly, the school improvement team, we visit schools at least twice in an annual calendar, and those 94 schools and settings, the results of those visits are collated by myself. So we have a broad overview that we can compare success. But there's a number of other items. I mean, if you're talking about the success of the impact measured in the success of pupil progress, there's the national personalised assessment outcomes. There are standardised outcomes that schools use that we can support them in the evaluation of. There's combined lesson observations that are shared. and there's the sharing of school-based quality assurance outcomes. There's a broad range that could be used. The one thing I would say, though, Mike, and I haven't spoken about this today in the report, is how are clusters supporting each other's self-evaluation. And if I'm being frank, one thing that I think clusters and we could do together is we could plan that work more strategically across the city. But to be fair, the middle tier review, which we're seeing the outcome of now, will help us as a local authority to facilitate that.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get my head around, how you'd bring together all of those different elements, I suppose. And does that come back down to you and your colleagues as school development?
Well, most of the evaluation is going to be school-based, and what we do, our job is then to help them assimilate that information that informs their individual school planning and their improvement planning. So the majority of that will come together at a school level, supported by the school improvement team. On a more strategic level, in terms of cluster working, I think I've indicated that the collaborative piece that of Welsh Government are making a priority now is going to be a focus for the school improvement partnership that exists in the coming years.
And I know you're going to come on to partner area, but I suppose I'd be asking the same question. How do we judge the effectiveness of the interventions by partner area? Maybe I'll leave that for you to do as the next section.
Yeah, I'm happy to field that question now. So in terms of what difference does it make to children and young people, I think is the important question. And, the organisation has changed. But one thing we've established in Swansea now is a commitment to act. And that commitment to act follows each opportunity of professional learning. What that does then is it follows a line back to the classroom. So and the regional partner are doing that as well. So, for example, if a classroom practitioner is enrolled on a professional programme, we expect the region then to be following up on the outcomes of that professional learning opportunity. And certainly in Swansea, if we were to undertake a similar professional learning opportunity with a member of staff, that commitment to act, or llwybyr dysgu, we're calling it in certain circles, we follow that practice then back into the classroom on a 3-monthly and 6-monthly basis. So the regional partner are following that suit. I hope that makes sense, Mike.
Yeah, it does. Thank you, David. And I suppose the challenge for me within this sort of scrutiny process and as a panel is how do we get to grips with that? How do we get informed of where the challenges might be and how we might be able to kind of support you and the schools in relation to driving some of these more impactful initiatives forward within the learning environment. Yeah,
thanks. And perhaps if I may, Mike, when we move forwards with this now, perhaps some of the advantages of the regional approach will come out in the discussion. Chair, just any indication of any further questions before I do go on with the rest of the report?
Great. Any other questions from anyone? There aren't. Oh yes, Helen wants to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to reflect on Councillor Day's comments there in relation to how do we scrutinise the impact of the regional offer. So just to note the change in emphasis from regional scrutiny that currently exists now to the 1st of April, when local scrutiny will be enhanced. So as we consider the work programme in the future, we would expect to see greater scrutiny at a Swansea level of the work of partneriaeth as well.
Fine, thanks. Back to you then, David.
Okay, thanks. So I'm now talking specifically about the regional offer. How does the region support improved teaching and learning? Covered some of which by Councillor Day's questions, but the underlying objective or purpose of the regional consortia, partneriaeth, was to provide professional learning to school-based colleagues, and it does that as well as providing bespoke and/or tailored support for schools as required, which is different to professional learning. But broadly speaking, partneriaeth provides 3 areas of professional learning: a calendar that you could sign up to using a website, a tailored approach to that as well. So if there's an offer for reading, for example, but doesn't quite meet the need of an individual school, they would tailor that approach to an individual school or group of schools, and then something completely bespoke. So that's the sort of offer from the regional partner. And my focus would be on which teaching and learning elements the regional partner focuses on, and that complements the work of Swansea through something called Teach for Purpose. And the Teach for Purpose programme, as detailed in 2.1 in the pack, gives you examples of the areas of focus for this piece of work. You can see the example there that one of our primary schools, and there's a number of them, but we've highlighted one that have made effective use of that regional piece of work to improve questioning. And, it's having a real benefit in the way that young people respond to and are responded to by the adults and their teachers. The regional partner also offers subject-specific and discipline-focused networks, collaborative networks, and we're not able necessarily to do that in Swansea because we haven't got the workforce with those skills. So, for example, they facilitate subject-specific networks, geography, history, the sciences, etc., across the region, and those networks and those collaborative partnerships are really well thought of by our Swansea colleagues, and it's a real example of where we're collaborating with other colleagues across the region. So although its focus is not reciprocal lesson observations and sharing of effective practice in that way, but the network does other things in terms of, and one example would be collaborating on the design and specifications of the new GCSE. Linked but not similar, and not too similar, would be the performance specialists or officers within Partneriaeth that have subject-specific and discipline-specific areas of responsibility. So, for example, Partneriaeth has science and technology lead officers who support the professional learning and/or specific support for schools, which in Swansea we're not able to do. And I want to highlight that because we're really keen to make sure that the regional offer doesn't duplicate the offer from our local authority from Swansea. So, for example, whilst we might have a literacy performance specialist in Swansea supporting schools, her area of experience is in the primary field, whereas in Partneriaeth, that literacy performance specialist offer comes with a secondary slant. So we make sure that we don't duplicate in order to make the most efficient use of the funds that we've got available. And I'm skipping through 2.12 through to just stepping back a second. Pardon me, I'm flipping my piece of paper in front of me. I'm flipping now to the last item, really, which for me is about the collaborative partnership that we've managed to create between the local authority and schools. So we do work alongside our regional partner, Partneriaeth, to develop this collaborative piece of work. So, for example, we are collaborating with a load of schools in Swansea, obviously, but one particular example was and presented at our Crossfaith head teacher meeting last week, where a school asks us for some support in a specific area, but instead of it feeling like I'm asking the local authority to intervene or we're telling a school that we need to help them, they're brokering a situation whereby it feels more of a partnership. So, for example, the school designed their own work in a particular area, and it was Pontliw Primary School in Swansea, and then made use of the regional partner and the use of the staff within Swansea to get a better deal for children and young people. So that presentation was made by one of our team and the head teacher in Pontliw Primary School last week in our Crossfaith head teacher meeting. And that was a holistic approach. So, for example, that partnership includes how are we going to work with teachers to improve the provision? How are we going to work with pupils to find out the impact of that? What's the quality assurance look like from a leadership perspective? And how are we using the regional partner to then support our evaluation of the effectiveness of the local authority? So we're beginning to get that model whereby we're using that whole range, that spectrum of offer and support across the region and the local authority for the betterment of outcomes for pupils and children and young people in our schools. I'm not going to read the conclusions because they're clear to you. But what I will say is the work, and I've mentioned it, the work and the recommendations from the middle tier review, the review of the roles and responsibility of regional partners in school improvement in Wales, isn't going to tell us too many things that we don't know in Swansea. We've been working with our schools for a number of years, and we have responsibility for school improvement. We are already prioritising the support for schools in Swansea through the School Improvement Partnership, and we are brokering an effective approach to collaborative partnerships. And one of those might be considered by yourselves as that approach to cluster working. So we've got a clear rationale to bolster that support and to tighten the intended outcomes of any collaboration and partnership. So really exciting times for us in Swansea, Chair. And on that note, I'll happily close my mouth and open up for any questions.
Great, fine. Thank you, David, for that, really interesting report. Any questions from members on the panel? I think it's Mike Day, as Councillor Mike Day. Mike.
I hope I'm not hogging it, and encourage others to ask questions or comments. So it's really heartening to see and to hear about all of these different elements, and just like to sort of say thank you to you and the staff within schools who are at the interface with the pupils in terms of the teaching learning areas. And just as an aside, I think it's an emphasis quite often, isn't it, in terms of moving some of the language from actually teaching to facilitating learning. And I think anything that we can do to do that is important. So the initiatives that you've identified, David, seem to be on the right track. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Very fine, thanks, Mike. I think the other thing to note is that we will, as a Swansea Scrutiny panel, will be looking at the work of Partneriaeth from April onwards. So we'll be looking at that directly rather than a separate group which I chaired, and Councillor Peter Black was a member of. So I think it's really important that we'll be doing that work. But it is important, and I think it's gone through a number of guises. We had Eru and then Partneriaeth, and to get to that point. But it is important that we build on that expertise that they have, and I think we were getting there, and so that is good news. But Mike, is that a historic hand, or you want to come back?
No. I know I'm old, but it's not historic. But it was just really sort of following up your comment there in relation to what the implications are for us as a scrutiny performance panel. Obviously, there's an increased workload shifting the requirement for us to look at Partneriaeth, and I wonder how that's going to be catered for. I don't know if it's something that would be taken up with the Scrutiny Programme Committee in relation to, does it mean that we'd actually have more meetings? Because it would be a shame for us to be involved in looking at Partneriaeth, which would then possibly detract from our ability in terms of time and resources to look at all the other important issues which within the scope of education.
I think that obviously we'll need to look at that when we look at our programme for next year, but it is an important piece of work. And the points that David made actually, and how we'll be working with Partneriaeth, and Partneriaeth will be the work that they'll be doing in Swansea schools to support us. That does need scrutiny because it is an important piece of work. But yeah, any other questions from anyone? No, David, thank you very much indeed. And thanks for the work that you've been doing around that. So thank you. Right, the next item on the agenda is number 9, and that's the work plan. Has anybody got any comments? No. If that's the case, our next meeting, we note our next meeting is on Wednesday, the 26th of March. So look forward to seeing you then, and thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.